Have you ever had a moment so small, so simple that it changed something inside you? Not in a loud, dramatic way, but like a gentle shift, a quiet opening in your heart. That's what happened to me one rainy Tuesday morning on Maplewood Lane. And it all started with an unexpected knock at the door. It was the kind of morning that wraps around you like a thick blanket. The sky was draped in a soft, moody gray. A light drizzle tapped gently against the windows, and the world outside looked like it had been painted in watercolor blurred, cool and calm. The perfect kind of day to stay tucked in bed, sipping tea, and losing yourself in the pages of an old novel. I was 52, living alone in a small, cozy house near the end of the lane. Maplewood was one of those neighborhoods where everyone knew your name, but no one really knew your story. We waved from porches, exchanged polite smiles, maybe lent each other a cup of sugar every now and then, but that was where it ended. Life had settled into a rhythm. Predictable, safe, and if I'm being honest, a little bit lonely. That morning I sat at my kitchen table with a warm cup of chamomile tea in my hands, gazing out at my garden through the misty window. My hydrangeas were in full bloom, their blue petals sagging slightly under the weight of the rain. The old oak tree in the backyard swayed rhythmically in the breeze, its leaves whispering secrets to the wind. I was somewhere between memory and daydream when I heard a knock at the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My son David lived in the city and rarely had time for surprise visits. My close friends were busy with their own routines, so the sound startled me. Setting my cup down, I patted softly to the door, half curious and half cautious. When I opened it, I was surprised to find my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, standing there. A tall man in his late 60s with silver hair, kind eyes, and an air of quiet dignity. He lived just 2 doors down, and though we'd exchanged greetings over the years, we had never shared more than a few passing words. In his hands, he held a small wrapped package. His expression was both warm and slightly nervous, something I hadn't expected from him. "Good morning, Linda," he said, his voice gentle and sincere. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I replied, smiling with polite curiosity. "What can I do for you, Mr. Thompson?" "Please," he said, returning my smile, "call me Henry." He shifted slightly as if uncertain about what to say next. "I noticed you've been spending a lot of time in your garden lately," he continued. "You've got quite the green thumb." I laughed softly. "It keeps me busy. I find it relaxing." Henry nodded, then extended the package toward me. "I saw this at the farmer's market last weekend and thought of you. It's nothing fancy, just a little something to brighten your day." For a moment, I was speechless. It had been years since anyone had given me a gift like that, unprompted, thoughtful, personal. I took the package carefully, feeling its weight and warmth in my hands. "Thank you, Henry. That's very kind of you." He shuffled his feet suddenly, looking a bit bashful. "Well, I'll let you get back to your morning." "Have a good day, Linda." "You too," I said, watching as he turned and made his way down the wet garden path and back to his house. When I closed the door and unwrapped the package, I found a ceramic planter, beautifully painted with delicate vines and tiny flowers. The kind of thing I might have picked for myself. I ran my fingers across its smooth surface and felt a flutter of emotion, gratitude, surprise, and a quiet warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. That afternoon, I planted a small fern in the new pot and placed it on my front porch. As I pressed the soil around its roots, I found myself glancing down the street toward Henry's house more often than I meant to. Funny how you can live near someone for years and never really notice them until one small act changes that. All I really knew about Henry was that he was a widower like many in our quiet neighborhood, and that he'd lived on Maplewood Lane as long as I had. Beyond that, he was a mystery. The next day, I decided to return the gesture. I dusted off my grandmother's oatmeal cookie recipe, one of those comfort recipes that fills the whole house with warmth, and baked a batch. Once they'd cooled, I arranged a few on a plate, covered it with a linen napkin, and made the short walk to Henry's door. When he opened it, his face lit up with a surprised smile. "I wanted to thank you for the planter," I said, holding out the plate. "It was such a lovely surprise." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "You didn't have to do that, but I appreciate it. Would you like to come in for a cup of coffee?" I hesitated just for a moment, but then I nodded. I'd like that. Henry's home was warm and full of character. Bookshelves lined the walls, each one filled with well-loved volumes. A soft fire flickered in the living room hearth, and there was a quiet hum of contentment in the air. We sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee and chatting about everything from gardening and travel to our favorite books. What surprised me most wasn't the conversation itself, but how effortless it felt, like slipping into a pair of well-worn shoes. Comfortable, familiar, easy. As I walked home later that evening, the scent of roses and rain lingering in the air, I felt a strange lightness in my chest. It wasn't just the gift or the coffee, it was something deeper. It was the feeling of being seen, not as a stranger or a neighbor, but as a person. That night, lying in bed with the sound of raindrops still echoing in the distance, I thought about Henry, about how one small, unexpected gesture had touched a part of me I didn't even realize was aching. In the days that followed, the world around me seemed just a little brighter. The rain cleared and Maplewood Lane was bathed in warm sunlight. My garden responded with a fresh burst of color, the blooms more vivid, the leaves greener. Or maybe it was just me seeing everything through new eyes. I started thinking about Henry more, about the way he listened during our conversation, not just hearing, but truly listening, as if every word I said mattered. I hadn't realized how much I missed that kind of connection. A few mornings later, I was in the garden, pruning my roses when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Henry walking toward me, hands in his pockets, smile wide. "Good morning, Linda," he said, stopping at the edge of my yard. "Those roses are stunning. You've really got a talent." Wiping my hands on my apron, I smiled back. "Thank you, Henry. They're my pride and joy. Mind if I take a closer look?" "Of course," I said, opening the gate. As he wandered through the rows, I pointed out the different varieties, the deep reds, the soft pinks, the creamy whites. He listened intently, asking questions and admiring the blooms like they were something precious. "You know," he said, after a moment, "I've always wanted a garden like this, but I've never had the patience for it. I admire your dedication. It's not as hard as it looks," I told him. "Just takes time and a little love." He chuckled softly. "Maybe you could teach me a thing or two." I looked at him at the sunlight dancing in his eyes and said simply, "I'd like that. Just as one small gesture can open a door, so too can a single invitation spark something more." "I'd be happy to," I said, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. "Why don't you come by tomorrow morning and we can get started?" Henry's face lit up like a child promised his favorite treat. "I'd like that. Thank you, Linda." The next morning arrived with crisp air and soft golden light streaming through the kitchen window. Right on time, Henry appeared at my doorstep wearing a flannel shirt, old jeans, and the kind of hopeful smile that made me forget the years that had passed us by. I handed him a pair of spare gardening gloves and led him out back to where the soil waited dark and rich, ready for new beginnings. We started slow, turning the soil, pulling out weeds, setting down plans for what we'd plant and where. There was an ease in our rhythm, a quiet joy in the shared task. Our conversations flowed as naturally as the breeze filled with soft laughter and the rustle of leaves. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed simple moments like these two people side by side, hands in the dirt, hearts a little lighter with each passing hour. What began as a one-time visit quickly turned into a quiet ritual. Morning after morning, we found ourselves in each other's gardens, sometimes mine, sometimes his, tending not just to plants, but to something deeper. A friendship was growing right alongside the tulips and rosemary, nurtured by shared cups of coffee, soft silences, and the comfort of steady company. One sunny afternoon, after planting a neat row of tulip bulbs in Henry's backyard, he suggested we take a break. He disappeared into the house and came back with a large glass pitcher filled with iced tea beads of condensation glistening on the sides. We sat on his porch, shaded by the wide eaves, and watched as birds fluttered through the trees, their songs drifting into the still air. "You know," he said after a while, his voice low and thoughtful, "I've lived on this street for over 20 years, and I've never really gotten to know any of my neighbors." I turned to him, surprised. "Really? You've been here that long?" He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "I guess I've always been a bit of a loner. Margaret, my wife, she was the social one. Me, I just kept to myself. I understood. More than he probably knew." "It's easy," I said, "to get caught up in your own little world, to forget there are people just next door who might be feeling the same way." He looked at me, then his gaze steady and sincere. "I'm glad you moved in, Linda. You've made this place feel like home again." His words hit me harder than I expected. I blinked, feeling a tightness in my throat that hadn't been there a moment ago. "Thank you, Henry," That means more than you know. We didn't speak for a while after that. But it wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind that settles in when everything that needs to be said has already been spoken. The sun was warm on our faces. The breeze whispered through the trees. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a kind of peace that went deeper than just the quiet of the moment. As the weeks passed, our bond deepened. We started sharing more than just gardening tips. Henry told me about his years as a teacher, the students he'd never forgotten, and his love for jazz music, how it reminded him of slow Sunday mornings with Margaret and the smell of fresh bread. I told him about my late husband, about David, and the years I spent raising him alone. We swapped memories, dreams, regrets like old friends catching up after a long absence. One evening we were sitting on my porch watching the sun dip below the trees in the distance, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. "She was the love of my life," Henry said quietly, holding a mug of tea between both hands. "Margaret, I never thought I'd find someone who could make me feel that way again." I turned to look at him, the honesty in his voice pulling at something tender inside me. "I understand," I said softly. "It's hard to lose someone you love." He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon. "But you know, I think she'd be happy to see me like this, spending time with someone who makes me smile again." I didn't know what to say. His words lingered in the air between us, warm and unspoken. That night after he'd gone home, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the little things that had brought us here. The planter, the cookies, the tulips. 1,000 small moments that had stitched together something beautiful. But life has a way of testing us, doesn't it? Just when things begin to feel steady, something always comes along to shake the ground beneath your feet. For us, that something was a storm. It was late September. The air still held traces of summer warmth, though the trees had started to shift, leaves turning amber gold crimson. Henry and I were spending more time together than ever, sharing meals, watching old movies, taking little drives to nearby towns. It felt like we were building something that mattered, something real. Then came the storm. It started subtly, low rumbles of thunder rolling in from the distance, a dark smudge of clouds on the edge of the sky. By evening, the wind had picked up, howling through the trees like a warning. Rain pelted the windows in thick sheets, and just like that, the power flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. My house was suddenly plunged into darkness. I lit a few candles and tried to stay calm, but an uneasy feeling had crept into my chest, tight and insistent. Then I heard it, a deafening crack, the sound of splintering wood. My heart lurched. I threw on my raincoat, grabbed a flashlight, and ran outside. The wind whipped my hair into my face, the rain soaking through my clothes in seconds. I followed the sound toward Henry's house, and my stomach dropped. A massive oak tree in his backyard had been struck by lightning. It had collapsed straight through the roof. "Henry," I screamed, racing to the front door. "Henry, are you okay?" He opened the door, his face pale and eyes wide with shock. "I'm fine," he said, breathless. But the tree, it came through the roof. I stepped inside, heart pounding. The damage was even worse than I'd feared. The corner of his living room was destroyed, jagged beams, soaked carpet, shattered glass. Rain poured through the gaping hole in the ceiling. "You can't stay here," I said, grabbing his arm. "It's not safe." He looked around, dazed. "But my house, your house can be fixed," I cut him off. "You can't stay here tonight. Come on, you're coming with me." He didn't argue. We gathered only what he needed, a few clothes, his medications, a photo of Margaret, and made our way back to my house, drenched but safe. Inside, I handed him a towel and a change of clothes. "Go get warm, I'll make some tea." By the time he came back downstairs, I had chamomile steeping on the stove and a fire crackling in the hearth. The candles cast a soft glow, and the storm outside, though still raging, felt somehow farther away. He sat on the couch, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. "Thank you, Linda," he said, voice quiet. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come." I handed him a mug and sat beside him. "You don't have to thank me. That's what friends are for." We sat there side by side, listening to the storm and the steady rhythm of the fire. The world outside was chaos, but in that room there was calm. After a while, he spoke again. "This reminds me of a night I spent with Margaret during a hurricane. We were young, just married. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough." I smiled, a lump rising in my throat. She sounds like an amazing woman. She was, he said. Then he looked at me, his gaze soft. And you remind me of her in so many ways. The warmth of Henry's words from the night before still echoed in my mind as if a light had been quietly switched on inside us both. His confession caught me off guard in the gentlest way, and suddenly I felt my cheeks flush with a mix of surprise and something tender. Henry reached over and took my hand in his grip warm, steady, reassuring. "Linda," he began, his voice low but filled with earnestness. "I know this might not be the perfect moment, but I have to say it. These past few months with you have meant more to me than I can ever put into words. You've brought light back into my life, and I don't want to let that go." I looked into his eyes, seeing the deep sincerity and vulnerability there. My heart was pounding, not from fear or uncertainty as it had before, but from hope. Real hope. "Henry," I whispered back, my voice soft, "you've brought light into my life too. I didn't realize how much I needed someone like you until you came along." A slow, warm smile spread across his face, one that made my heart swell with something I hadn't felt in years. "Then maybe," he said gently, "we can figure this out together." I nodded, feeling a peaceful calm settle over me like a warm blanket on a chilly evening. Outside, the storm still raged on, but inside that small room, it felt as if the sun had finally broken through the clouds. We sat there, hands intertwined, talking late into the night until the rain ceased and the first fragile light of dawn began to slip softly through the windows. The morning after the storm arrived clear and bright, the kind of day that fills you with a sense of fresh beginnings and quiet hope. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves, and the sunlight streaming through my kitchen window felt like a promise whispered on the breeze. Henry and I sat together at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and nibbling on toast slathered with homemade jam. The events of the previous night still lingered in our minds, heavy but softened by the new closeness we shared. "I should call the insurance company," Henry said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Maybe even get a contractor to look at the damage." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We'll figure it out one step at a time." His eyes glowed with gratitude as he smiled. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Linda. You don't have to find out," I replied, smiling back. Over the next several days, we worked together to restore Henry's home. The insurance adjuster came and went, contractors arrived to patch up the roof, and bit by bit order returned to the chaos. It was exhausting work, but there was something deeply satisfying about it, something tangible that strengthened the bond between us. Each nail hammered and board replaced felt like a building block for the life we were starting to build together. One evening, after a long day spent cleaning up debris and sorting through damaged belongings, Henry and I found ourselves sitting on my porch. The sky above Maplewood Lane was ablaze with the colors of sunset pinks, oranges, and purples, blending in a breathtaking masterpiece that stole my breath away. "You know," Henry said softly, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night, about figuring this out together." I turned toward him, heart skipping a beat. He took a deep breath, his expression serious but full of hope. "I don't want to waste any more time, Linda. Life's too short. I've already spent too much of it alone. I want to be with you if you'll have me." Tears welled up, Joe lit up in my eyes, but I didn't try to blink them away this time. "Henry," I whispered, "I feel the same way. I've been alone for so long and didn't realize how much I needed someone like you until you came into my life." He reached for my hand again, his touch steady and warm. "Then let's do this," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Let's build a life together, whatever that looks like." I nodded, a wave of peace and happiness washing over me like sunlight after a long winter. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, filled with excitement, nervousness, and the wonderful chaos that comes with new beginnings. Henry's house was repaired, but he spent more and more time at mine until it felt like we were already living together. We talked about the future, about merging our lives, traveling to places we'd always dreamed of, growing old side by side. The possibilities stretched before us, thrilling and terrifying all at once. One crisp October morning, we took a walk through the neighborhood, soaking in the fiery colors of fall and the crisp freshness of the air. As we strolled hand in hand, I felt a deep sense of contentment settle in my chest. It was as if I had finally found my place in the world. "You know," Henry said as we passed a particularly stunning maple tree, its leaves glowing a brilliant red, "I think Margaret would have liked you." I looked at him, surprised. "Really?" He nodded, his eyes soft with memory. She always said I needed someone who could keep me on my toes, someone with a kind heart and a strong spirit. That's you, Linda, he said simply. Tears filled my eyes again, but this time I let them fall freely. Thank you, Henry, I said softly. That means more than you'll ever know. He stopped walking and turned to face me, taking both my hands in his. Linda, I know we're not young anymore, but I think we have a lot of good years ahead of us, and I want to spend every single one of them with you. I smiled through my tears, feeling a joy so profound it nearly overwhelmed me. I want that too, Henry, more than anything. He leaned in and kissed me, a gentle, tender kiss that felt like a promise. And in that moment, surrounded by the brilliant colors of fall and the warmth of his love, I knew this was only the beginning of something truly beautiful. As we continued our walk, the sun shining down and leaves crunching beneath our feet, I felt an overwhelming gratitude for Henry, for the life we were building, and for the unexpected kindness that had brought us to this moment. Life may throw curveballs when you least expect them, but sometimes, just sometimes, those curveballs lead us exactly where we need to be.